Hello, welcome back to Math Time with Professor Prime, and I am your host as always, Professor Prime. And today we're going to talk about math and the Matrix, and I'm going to have an absolute blast. I hope you do as well. Here's how it's going to go. I'm going to talk about the Matrix itself, the franchise as a whole, math, and how it's used inside of those things as well as in the meta context. And I'm going to talk about just so many things. And yes, there will be references. And yes, I will talk about matrix theory. And I don't mean the fan kind of theory, but we'll get to that. That being said, I really do want to have some fun with this, and I hope you do too. But before we do, one, there's going to be spoilers ahead. You can assume all the spoilers. And two, I have a question for you. Before you continue, will you take the blue pill or will you take the red pill? If you take the blue pill, the story ends here. You can click out of the video, go about your everyday. You can forget about what you saw here. Or you could choose the red pill. You can stay here in Wonderland. You can explore, go on an adventure. And as you do so, I can lead you down the rabbit hole and show you how deep it goes. You will learn some things, but you may never view life the same. So what will it be? Will you choose the blue pill or the red pill? So you've chosen the red pill. Bold move, but ultimately a good decision. Who dares wins. Let's get into things. And remember, spoilers ahead. All of the spoilers. Alright, so let's get into the Matrix itself. It is mathematical in nature, created by AI. It is a system about control, a system that presents something that is cyclical in nature. Math is built into its core. When I think about AI and I think about comp sci, math is all up in that, all up in those things. And I'm fascinated by that because, I grew up when the Matrix first came out, and, and it was new, it was bold. And over these last 20 or so years, I've gotten to see that, evolve. And I remember when I took Algebra 2 and we got to systems of equations, we didn't get past that, and that's most of the case. That's usually the case with Algebra 2, but I bring that up because when I think about systems of equations these days, I think about matrices and how insane it is that we don't teach those. Because, a matrix is a system of equations depicted as a rectangular array. And it's hard not to think about that mathematical association when I'm thinking about the Matrix, partially because of all the comp sci stuff, but also because of what we see in later films. We find out that everything is so elaborate, everything is calculated, if you're to believe what the architect says, right? Because we learn that the rebellion was part of a plan, it was part of a calculation. And that's insane to me. That's interesting to me because, the idea is Neo, which is an anagram of one. If you didn't notice, is the sixth, the one, and that's powerful to me. math is seriously right at the core of the Matrix, and I think it's fascinating because you have this expected cycle of destruction and rebirth. And through the films and like other media, you find out that before all this took place, right? Like there was an original Matrix, aka the Paradise version. It didn't work. Some people rejected what the architect considered perfection, to be fair. And this was followed by the Nightmare version, which, oh my god, I would kill to see that version. Right? It just sounds epic, partially because of the name, but also the implications. That didn't go well, and so by the third version, they add a system, right? And that's what the Matrix that we know of. Sorry, that's where it began. I can speak. It's not been a long day. I'm gonna roll right past it. So the whole thing is like the Matrix that we get to know is started on that third try. That's how I'm interpreting it out. And then there were 6 iterations after that. And with again like Neo being the 6th version of the one. And what's interesting about it is if you're watching this on YouTube, I've labeled it the one. Like sorry, I labeled it Math in the Matrix, the one, the Prime program, the awesomeness. Partially because it sounds cool, but also it does pertain to the video. So Neo is the one, and he has what is considered the Prime program, the source code for the machines. And eventually this allows him to do all sorts of crazy stuff within the Matrix. And you know, it's really appropriate given like his identity before he wakes up in the Matrix. Because if you remember, he was initially Thomas Anderson, a programmer by day, hacker by night. In any case, so you know, there's a lot of math built into the Matrix itself and how it's structured and how it flows and how it functions and how it's used in the series itself, right? But then there's more to it, right? Because you have how the machines are created in the first place, how the ships are like flow and function, right? There's whether you're in the Matrix or in the quote unquote real world, there's physics, right? There's physics. There's a lot going on. There's math and physics, and there's math and bio and chemistry, and all play a role in how things come together. And everyone is connected to the Matrix, and I think that's interesting because we're dealing with networks. And if I recall correctly, like the initial idea was to say that the machines were using humans as part of like a massive like network, and getting a lot out of that before the whole using them as batteries pretty much, because when you think about it, it doesn't work that well, but that seemed to be some studio interference. At any rate, so you have math being used in the Matrix itself, but also just like the world that's in the Matrix, the world that's outside of the Matrix, or so we think, because there's some theories that isn't the real world, that it's created by the machines as well, the world that we see, and I think there's some validity to that, but I haven't seen any hardcore confirmation, but it makes more sense that way. But that being said, outside of that, you get into the idea of what it takes to make a movie in the first place, right? Because one, the movie had a budget, and if I'm not mistaken, had a budget of 63 million, and it made about 463 million, give or take. And so I feel like that's pretty interesting because if you look at the costs, right, and compare that to the revenue, like what it made worldwide at the box office, just on that first movie alone, they made a profit of $400 million. And that's insane to me. But going back to just having that budget, they had to decide what they wanted to do with that budget, right? Because you have to pay cast, you have to pay crew, you have to pay for budgeting, and it's like, so you have to put all that stuff together, right? And then when you get to the movie itself, you have the time that it takes to make the movie, right? You have, and there's math in that. You have the visuals, there's math in that. One of the things with the Matrix is it's very stylized combat, and there's math in the timing with each of those scenes. There's math in the animations, and when you get to bullet time, which the Matrix popularized, there's math in that. And it's this idea that the character is moving so fast that everything seems slow, to it, you know, and we're dealing with math not only in the timing, but math when we're talking about speed. And I think that's really, really cool. And then you have, like, you know, the actors themselves, right? They are saying this line, that line. They're doing a certain amount of takes. They're practicing their timing, their motion, their breathing, and there's math in all of that. They're playing off of each other. There's math in that. There's math in all of it. There's math in the music as well. There's math in the lighting. There's math in writing and mapping out the story. The original Matrix is like about 2 hours and a half almost. And so you have that amount of time to tell a story. And then it gets interesting because when they were making those first three movies, so much was happening, right? Because from 1999 to 2003, that's when we're seeing the movies, right? Like in 1999, that's when the first Matrix came out. Then in 2003, you end up getting Reloaded, sorry, The Matrix Reloaded, and that came out. And then like 6 months later, also in 2003, you get The Matrix Revolutions. And it's kind of crazy just to think about that. So in that 4 years time, like they had a lot to consider and a lot to do and a lot to delegate. There's a lot of math and logistics involved in all that. And I think it's fascinating because back when when Reloaded came out, you also had the game Enter the Matrix, which takes place during it and leading up to it. And so they had to make time for that game, and that game is, you know, largely a shooter, but there's also combat sections, and right, and no matter how you cut it, there's math in all that. Math in not only how you program the game, but math in the music in the game, math in the combat, how it flows, how it functions, math in the gunplay, math in the melee attacks, right? Because you have health to consider, you have powers ups to consider. They allowed you to use bullet time in that game. You had to be strategic about that. They called it focus. I don't know why. But anyway, there's math in that, building that up and using it. And yeah, so there's all of that, and I think that's amazing. And at that same time, like, if I'm not mistaken, that same year, like the Animatrix also came out, and as I'm recording this, I saw that my face lit up about that. And you know why that is? Because the Animatrix is as good as they say. It is absolutely amazing. And here's the thing. So there's math in that too. You had about like well, somewhere between like an hour and a half and 2 hours. So like I think it was 102 minutes for the Animatrix, and with it, you have 9 stories. So they had to tell that 9 stories in that 102 minutes time. So they had to be very deliberate with the lengths of the story. But there's also just math and animation and how it flows and how it functions. I did a video on math and animation a while ago, and if I remember, I'll link that in the description because I had fun with it. It was awesome. But my whole thing is that there's like a lot of math involved in that animation process, right? There's a lot of motion. There's math in how that's programmed, how things work, how it functions and flows and feels. You know, there's geometry, there's physics, there's programming, there's so much in it. And so you had all of these things coming out, and somewhere along the line with these movies, they also had comics. And what's cool about that is the initial run of the comics were free on the official Matrix website back in the day. They would later release them into like books, like 2 volumes that had the initial comics, but also some new material. And I think that's really cool because when you talk about comics, there's a lot of math involved in that too. Because you have like a certain amount of pages that you want to tell your story in, and because it's like comics is such a unique medium, you can really take advantage of how you draw things out, right? How many panels you use, and how you use those panels, right? There's so much math and how things flow and function in a comic. And it's really cool because you have so much liberty on that page, right? And online, you can really have some fun with it. And, you know, there's math on getting something like that online. It's really cool. And I've done stuff on like comics as well because I'm a big fan. But that being said, so far as you can see, right, we've had a game, we've had 3 movies, we've had comics, and then there was like 2 other games down the line with the Matrix. There was the Matrix Online, which unfortunately I never played, and I can't at this point because it stopped in 2009. But the idea is that it actually continued the story of the movies, and it was an MMO, like RPG, and there's a lot of math in that, right? There's a lot of math and like the classes and what they do, how much health they have, what they could do in the context of the game, how much damage they could dish out, how much damage they could take. There's just a lot of math and how RPGs work in general, but especially MMOs is pretty wild. And then the third game that they had was The Path of Neo, which pretty much retold the three Matrix movies with some tweaks. But no matter how you cut it, there's a lot of math and like that too, like the combat, how the story unfolds, and it's all interesting to me. And so one of the things that I mentioned before was like what it took to make the Matrix like money wise, and what it made. And so then you look at, and I was talking about the original Matrix, right? But if you look at the other two movies, they made a considerable amount too. Like with the, with Reloaded and Revolution, they both had a budget at around 150, according to some sources at least. I'm sorry, 150 million. Let me clarify, 150 million dollars. And they both made different things. Like with Reloaded, it made like I think 720 million about, and with Revolutions only about 430 million. But I bring all these things up because it's fascinating to me. And just as a recap on the original movie, it was made on a budget of 63 million and had about made about 464 million worldwide. And I think that's interesting because no matter how you cut it, these movies made a lot of money, and I think that's crazy. And when you look at the first one, yes, $400 is a lot of money. And when you look at like how much they made versus how much they spent, um, their profit was around around 6 times their budget. And then for the second movie, that was for the first movie, and then for the second movie, um, if we compare the profit to the cost or the budget, um, they made slightly less, but it still made a lot of money, right? Because they made around 600 million or so, which in this case amounted to about 5 times as much. And then for the last one, they did make less money than the second one, despite having the same budget. And when you look at that, and compare the budget and the profit, they made about 3 times as much. So things varied, but they were still making a considerable amount of money on each film. And when you consider the whole picture, right, you have 63 million, and then you have about 150 million for the sequels to the original Matrix. Sorry if that wasn't clear. If you're looking at the movies, you have the first one was 63 million. The second one. I don't know where it's going with that. The second one. I was trying to say the second one. The second one was it's about 150 million, and the third one's 150 million. So altogether, the Matrix movies cost about $363 million to make, and made about 1.6 billion. So overall, they made about 5 times as much, and that's insane when you think about it. And that's just with the movies worldwide, right? Like that's just the movies, like as they were released in theaters at the time. But then you have DVD sales, VHS sales, all that. You have the Animatrix, because that was released. Like I think like the first 4 episodes were free, and then like when you get the whole like set, they released that on DVD and all that good stuff. So you had the movies making money when they were in theaters, but they were still making plenty of money and breaking records at the time. Like when you're talking about the home office market. Then they were making money off of the video games. They were making money off of the Animatrix, and later made money off of the comics, which were initially free back in the day. Which I think that's fair because they collected them in a physical copy, right? That being said, they also made a lot of money in merchandising. And so there's a lot of math and all of that, like, cause there's a lot of money involved, but like how everything functions is very mathematical in its nature, and the Matrix itself was very impactful, right? A lot of people like either pretty much took things directly and said it was parody, or they just like cribbed from certain things. But then the Matrix itself has been accused of that too. Some things are like you know I think harder to argue against. But then there are other cases where people say that they stole this or that from them, and there was like at least two lawsuits where um, you know the people who were accusing them didn't win, and it's for the whole like them taking this or that. I think there's arguments to be made because like did they take some things from different material, or do you count that as inspiration? It's very tricky with art, but I think it's fair to say that like no matter how you cut it, whether you thought that they took this or that, whether you thought they weren't being unique in their philosophy, which I disagree with, you can't argue that they were unique in how they presented things, right? If you can, I'd be very, very curious to hear why you say that. No, I'm serious, right? Like, continue the conversation. But with that in mind, I think it's very cool how big the Matrix is. And that being said, since it's so big, they have tried to, come back to that world more than once. And for the first time, though, since they've been trying, we know that we're getting a Matrix movie. The trailers exist. Or do they? But yeah, they exist. But so the thing about that is, if you've seen the trailers, I won't spoil them here. They make you start wondering some things, right? Because like the way the Matrix ends, some things happen that feel pretty definitive. So it's like they're doing some different things in the trailer, and you gotta wonder what's gonna go down. Now I can't say that like the movie will absolutely be good, but I'm at least intrigued. I hope that it's good. I hope that it's going to make a statement. I hope that this movie that is a sequel in a crazy large franchise actually comes up with something new. I hope that they push the envelope like they did once before. I look forward to that. And with all of that stuff mentioned, I grew up, um, you know, uh, throughout 3 decades pretty much. I was an 80s baby, but I was like a 90s kid and early 2000s kid slash teenager. I guess really teenager at that point. But when I first saw The Matrix, I saw that like not long before the other movies were coming out. I saw it a little late to the game, and it blew my mind. And I don't know, I was just at a very interesting point in my life when I saw The Matrix for the first time. Um, when I was around 14, a lot happened. I started to view the world differently around 14, going into 15. Um, Kind of in a way that I couldn't look back. I was dealing with nihilism for the first time, dealing with cynicism for the first time, questioning everything, questioning religion, questioning philosophy, questioning everything. So many questions and none of the answers. It was tough. But around that time, I encountered things like The Matrix. I encountered things like Metal Gear Solid, and I bring up Metal Gear Solid because that was pretty crucial to me back then as well. So with The Matrix, it was interesting because you wonder, maybe not to the extent that the movie presents it. You wonder if things are real, right? You wonder what is anything. You've been told a lot growing up, and you do wonder, like, okay, so what is really going on in the world, right? You feel disillusioned, and it's interesting to see a piece of media tackle that because for me, around that era is like when I started seeing more complex stuff like that. Like well, I mean, there was stuff before that. Like I mean, I grew up on Animorphs. Like that was pretty intense. They didn't deal with things like nihilism and stuff like that, but they covered some like pretty crazy themes. Like they covered, you know, child soldiers, war, and all that good stuff. So but this, I think, hit me a little harder just because of where I was at, and around the same time, I think like a little before that, I had a different lens where it wasn't so much questioning reality, but it was definitely dealing with nihilism with purpose, and that came in the form of Metal Gear Solid. It came at just the right time in my life. Now, for the record, I have not gotten over nihilism. I haven't gotten over what it means to be alive and what it means to die. I haven't, but I found better ways to deal with it, and it's interesting the power, to see the power that media can have, depending on where you're at in your life and really in general. But I just remember my teenagers being they were interesting. Like, I mean, I was dealing with depression. I didn't understand that I was dealing with the depression, the nihilism, the cynicism, just growing up, figuring out what I wanted to do. And I got into a point where I was just like doing whatever, just because I had to figure out my purpose. I had to create that, and it was interesting to see characters do that. It was interesting to see stories that added a little bit more to the table that weren't so one dimensional. And I think The Matrix, at least for that first one, definitely fit the bill. Now, I'd argue for the second and third ones, yes, you can still say a lot of things, but I do feel like even though I enjoyed both of those movies, I didn't as much as the first. I feel like they got kind of bloated, but for context, they were made concurrently. So there's a lot that ties them together pretty well, despite some things feeling disconnected, if that makes sense. And I think that's fascinating too, because like they were doing these movies, like the Wachowskis, they were doing these movies, and they also had a lot of input in the comics. They had in the games and just all of the Matrix media. Really, they were heavily involved with all of that, the Animatrix, all of it. So how do you begin to juggle all of that, right? Like, I feel like it becomes a logistical nightmare, and it's impressive that they were able to come up with as much as they did and have it actually tied together. I don't think everything flowed perfectly, and I feel like there were definitely points where things seemed kind of pretentious. But I do feel like I enjoy the franchise, despite its flaws. And for the record, I hated the architect. It was cool that he was talking about math and all, but God, he was pretentious and obnoxious. He's like, "Oh yeah, I made this system, and it's pretty much perfect except for that one way that it isn't perfect. But I did some tweaks, and so yeah, it's good now." If you're wondering, that's not how he talks. I don't know where I was going with the way I was mocking him. I wanted to mock him. But seriously though, like, he's obnoxious. And a lot of people get lost in his scene because he's talking about a lot, and he's being very verbose. He's not very good at talking to people. That being said, his character is interesting in the regard that he's very mathematical in how he approaches things. But it was fascinating that he even realized that he couldn't make even a close to perfect matrix, and so you have the Oracle coming into the picture to kind of offset him. And throughout the series, the idea is that they're playing a game back and forth to see where things go. Does the cycle continue, or do you get peace between humans and machines? And while we're led to believe you get that peace, later material like the Matrix Online, I didn't play it, but I did read up on the story, would suggest there's more to it than that. But even if you never get to the Matrix Online, it's the way that Revolutions ends was pretty contentious. Right, it lets some things open. And one of the ways, because I forget the exact ending, but I'm pretty sure it ends with Morpheus asking, "Is this real?" Which is appropriate given his connection to dreams. And I find that fascinating. Oh, one more cool thing along the way that I found out in terms of Matrix. So I find it hard to believe that the Matrix wasn't at least on some level inspired by the mathematical concept, comp sci concept, both. Um, but that could be a coincidence, but I really doubt it. But the whole thing that definitely could not have been a mistake was that the Matrix is Latin for womb. I found that out. I think that's pretty cool. So I feel like having that math connection and that womb connection, I feel like both of them were intentional. With the womb one, I'm definitely, and the math one is it has to be right. With that being said, I hope you enjoyed this movie. I like The Matrix. Is it perfect? No, but it was a game changer, and I am actually curious about this fourth one. So I enjoyed the franchise. The Animatrix is just, oh my god, it's amazing. Um, and yeah, like I look back on the Matrix and I reflect well on it. And I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope you dealt with the Matrix before and you see it in a different light. And if you haven't, I hope you try it out. Either way, I hope you think about math and the Matrix differently. And one more thing, just because I want to address it, if anyone asks me, like, do I subscribe to simulation theory? Know that it is a no. It is a hard no. I hate it. It's dumb. And if you believe in it, I am sorry if that offends you, but I can't get with it. It makes no sense logically. There's a lot of jumps in it. It's dumb. um, Again, I am sorry if anyone believes it and I offended them, but that's just my opinion on it. You can take that with a grain of salt. Assume I'm a simulation if you want, but I'm not a fan of it, and I wish people would stop thinking about it. And it's just like I couldn't help but think about simulation theory while thinking about the Matrix. But it's just like, yes, please, please stop it. Please stop the theory. It's dumb. Wow, it hits me. It hits me hard. Um, but seriously, I hope you all enjoyed the video. I hope you contribute to the conversation in one way or another. Have an excellent day.